Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Alfie. For those who don't know me, I am teaching a course at the School of Materialist Research on capitalism and psychosis. You can check that out here at the website below. But I'm also today again here just as a podcaster, as an interviewer, to record some short promotional, short tasters to all the other professors that are teaching at the School of Materialist Research this summer. So I'm extremely happy today to be joined by Gil Anidjar from University of Columbia, who's a professor there in religion, Department of Religion, and has written a great many books, and he is teaching. When is your course? Do you know when your course is, Gil?
I believe it is in October.
Yes,
Perhaps late October, early November, something like this.
I think that's right. I think I'm first, actually, and you're second. So following my course will be Gil's course. You can go to the School of Materialist Research website to read about that and sign up. Yeah, very happy to have Gil with us today. We're going to talk just for 20, 30 minutes about his work, what he's going to be teaching, and what his recent work has been about. In particular, a new book which came out just last year with Columbia University Press, which is called On the Sovereignty of Mothers, the Political as Maternal. So we're going to dig into Gil's theories of motherhood and politics, and we're also going to talk a little bit about this concept of the anti-political and how it relates to activism and politics today, because this is another contemporary topic of Gil's. So really glad to have you, Gil. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the time you're taking. I'll just make a small correction. You said the University of Columbia. It's actually Columbia University. It might otherwise be mistaken for the country.
Oh, I see.
Columbia.
In the US.
Yes. But yeah, thank you. I will just say that since the title of the course is the concept of the anti-political, I actually came to it kind of by way of mothers, but mostly because, as I was telling you earlier, I came across this book by Cedric Robinson, a book of his that is lesser known than Black Marxism, and a book that is called The Terms of Order, where Robinson actually makes a full frontal critique of political philosophy and political science, arguing that the discipline, the discourse, is structured around two basic concepts: the concept of order and the concept of leadership. And as a result, Robinson makes the argument that other traditions of collective organization, collective existence are pushed aside, and he refers in particular to anarchist traditions, or what he calls anarchist traditions, whether from Africa or elsewhere in the world, and he refers to this tradition under the heading of the anti-political. And I have to say that when I read him at first, I wasn't entirely convinced that this was quite the best handle to reflect on what is not part of the Western tradition, Western political tradition. But with time, I came to, for some reason, identify a little bit with that handle as I was thinking about mothers, and I very much don't regret calling the book The Political as Maternal. Uh, um, um, but I started thinking that there was also a certain use and a certain interest in thinking of the maternal as that which is in fact an anti-political, a kind of alternative to the political, and also a kind of decentering of what we think of as political. With time, things started actually kind of picking up and reflecting on other topics I've been interested in, whether it's the enemy or blood, or more recently danger. These are concepts, if we might say, that are in many ways fundamental to thinking about politics and about the political, but they have never made it to the center of attention, right? Again, the enemy is kind of marginal. It's what is outside of the polity. Even if there's an internal enemy, blood is what precedes the political. Danger is completely outside, it seems, even though security is fundamental to what we think of as politics. And then more recently, mothers, right? So generally, what I would like to do with the course is to actually think about these and perhaps other concepts, other frames of understanding that are in many ways essential to thinking about politics, but are kept on the margin and do not move to the center of our attention. So that's the general kind of purpose of calling my class in a way that is, I fear, a little pretentious and bombastic. The concept of the anti-political, resonating, of course, with Carl Schmitt on the concept of the political.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's let's stay on this topic then of the anti-political, and then come later to mothers, because I feel like we started with it. You know, something interests me here. Like, is this kind of a lot of this has to do with the question of what is meant by political, right? And so, you know, it's interesting. I think it's very interesting that you pointed out your subtitle, "The Political as Maternal." You know, according to this other way of thinking, you might say the anti-political as maternal, or something like that. But is what's at stake here like a little bit of what's meant by politics? Because I remember in my first year of undergraduate, you know, being told this, you know, there's politics with a capital P, which is like electoral politics, things like that. And then there's, you know, politics with a small p, which is like everything else, the politics that is inherent to family, culture, society in a different way. So I sort of reminded of that debate, and also of, you know, a recent, I don't know if you've seen the writing of Anton Jaeger, but he has this term, hyperpolitics, and he says that basically this is an age of hyperpolitics because we see politics everywhere. You know, so we watch a TV show and we say, oh, this is right wing, this is left wing, this is whatever. And for him, this is a problem because it makes it very difficult to distinguish like where truly politics is happening, right? So we talk about politics all the time, and we say there's politics everywhere, but where is politics actually happening? You know, and yeah, I mean, this is like Jacques Rancière writes about this, saying that politics is about knowing where it's possible to make change. You know, to actually So yeah, my question there is does that resonate with you? Like, what's at stake in saying that, you know, this question is it politics or is it anti-politics? Like, what for you is at stake in that distinction, let's say?
Right. Thank you for this. I actually, in the time of those debates that you just described very well, there's also the emergence or the re-emergence of that substantive, the political, right, which begins as a kind of article, right? It's an adjective. This is political. This is not political. With a capital P or with a lowercase p. But the moment the political gets substantivized, which is often, one often credits Carl Schmitt for that particular move, the question becomes, how does one distinguish the political from the aesthetic, from the ethical, from the economic, even. And Schmitt famously speaks of an intensification of any of those spheres: aesthetic, religious, economic, etc. And the point of incandescence, as it were, the point of conflict, is the moment where the political emerges as a separate realm, as it were, right, as a distinct realm. And as long as antagonism has not been reached, then we are within, Schmitt would say, liberalism, which is where the political comes to die, as it were. So the question of the singularity of the political, as opposed precisely to other realms, right, is one of the things that I found, with many others, very appealing. And with a certain resistance to the way Schmidt puts it, which is that the distinction between the friend and the enemy, or for that matter, the concept of the sovereign, right? Not even the concept, the very fact of sovereignty is what is going to define the political. Agreeing with Schmidt that contestation is part of what we're talking about, I have felt in the particular horrifying juncture at which we find ourselves that you're right, everything is political, or everything can be recognized as political. But then the question is, well, where exactly are we supposed to look, right? I mean, we can look left and right, and we can say, well, I go left, so I don't look right. Or we can say, well, we have to look everywhere for the particular political issue that is, to us, most urgent. And the concept of urgency and of emergency is, of course, at the center of Schmidt and of much of our political thinking since. And I'm more and more concerned with the question of how do we decide not just what the emergency is, but rather how do we distinguish between multiple emergencies, right? Like, what is most important today? And many of us are, of course, concerned with whatever it is that we are concerned, and with good reason. But then we found ourselves in utter disagreement with others who said, no, this is more urgent, right? So is the environment the most urgent? Is the rise of fascism the most urgent? Is the politics of reproduction, the treatment of women and trans and etc., right? And we can find a way to bring it all together, although that is quite difficult to do. And one of the reasons why it's difficult to do is that those different issues are at odds with each other very often. Which brings us back to the question of which is the emergency toward which we mobilize ourselves, and how do we actually convince others that this one is the emergency we must respond to. So for me, the anti-political is that which, as it were, remains on the margin, right? I'll give you an example from the American presidential election that has, ended, as we know. During the campaign, the issue of abortion was, of course, quite present. And one of the rhetorical ways in which it was present was that there was, in fact, a kind of attack on women, which of course was true. The misogyny with which we live is obviously recognizable. But when speaking about abortion, for many, many reasons, it seems most important and most relevant to speak about mothers, right? Statistically, most abortions are in fact performed by mothers. It is women who already have children who need or who decide to have an abortion. So overall, rather than think of marginal cases where non-mothers have to decide whether or not to become mothers, we might consider that the treatment of mothers across the board is actually what is at stake. And so, in a moment of hyperbole, I said we need to address the war on mothers. But mothers were barely mentioned. And so it's one of the things that actually led me to think that that Cedric Robinson had a point when he reflected on the anti-political, in the sense that that which is against the political, outside of the political, ends up being quite central to the political, but never makes it to the front line, to the foreground, as it were. And mothers have a tendency to disappear from the political stage and from the political concerns. So that would be one example for me of an emergency. Mothers, the politics of reproduction being another term, but mothers as the political subject, right? La part des sans part, as Rancière would say. How do we give the part that mothers deserve within the polity, without avoiding mothers as political subjects, and perhaps even as, I'll say it in a non-Rancierian way, foundational to the political. right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think this is so interesting. Let me ask more about mothers, but first, just on what you were saying there about anti-politics, I think you're absolutely right that, and yeah, this is also what Rancière says, that, it's a question of what is capable of counting for something. We can see politics everywhere, but as you say, we struggle with this. What is capable of counting for something and what isn't? What is the site of contestation? You're absolutely, it's a very brave and important topic to think about this, why we're in this. Because what leads to this weird kind of impasse, really, where, as you say, is this more important than this and more important than this? And this kind of structures our way of thinking about politics. And I think that's a really interesting topic to be thinking about. I'm sure that people will want to study that and talk about that on the course. It also reminded me, your theory of anti-politics, of almost what I think of as, when I think of Marx's conception of communism, because here also talks about communism not as this, it gets extremely easily misread, but he often talks about communism more like a sort of spectre of capitalism. So it's not like an alternative or an other system, but like something which kind of ghosts the margins of capitalism and ends up feeding in or whatever. And it reminded me of the way you were framing the question of the anti-political as this kind of like peripheral that has the potential to be central, or is central precisely by being peripheral or whatever. I think seemed like a super interesting way of
I like that a lot. Absolutely. It's Derrida, after Marx, would actually speak of a ontology, right? Precisely of a spectre that is very, very difficult to look at directly, and on the other hand, cannot be done away with, right? And that's certainly part of the argument, that there is a spectre that haunts Europe, there is a spectre that haunts capitalism, and we call this justice, or whether we call this communism, it is not something that can simply go away. And so, yes, the anti-political, meaning that what is at stake is not to refound, right, like to bring a new foundation to the political, but rather to consider that which any foundation keeps out and yet is haunted by. I mean, philosophically, of course, one can find many references to something of that order, right? A constitutive outside or whatever, authorities of all kinds. But I think that to keep the political as a kind of central frame and ask what is it that is always outside. And as you were saying, Rancière, of course, also gives us quite a lot of guidance, right? Asking who is it that is in fact not simply not represented, but doesn't have a share, doesn't have a share in the political, and how does the claim for a share, la part des sans part, right, becomes the site of the political struggle, right? So that it's not police, right? It's not the politics as such that is at stake, but rather that which questions it and question its very order.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's super interesting. I mean, let me ask about mothers then, and talk a little bit about that before we run out of time, because I was also intrigued by your comment on the question of a war on mothers. So I'd like to hear a bit more about why you think a war on motherhood or mothers is taking place. I mean, it also makes me think of some of the kind of, even in progressive left circles, we do see this kind of like abolish the family discourse and things like that, which do kind of strike me as a kind of war on motherhood or whatever. But I just wanted to get your sense of why you used that that sentence, and what for you is a war on motherhood, and what is at stake in that. And also maybe it's something to do with economics. That's another side of my thinking, thoughts there. I haven't really formulated it, but is this a question of material and economic decline, meaning that we can't afford to these motherhood, which is maybe happening with some declining birth rates in some parts of the world.
Right. That's interesting. It might take me elsewhere, but I'll just try to quickly answer one of the trajectories I went through was to recognize that we have long thought the political as paternal, right? Whether the patriarchy or just the fact that the father is the figure of sovereignty, right? And then with the emergence of social contract theory, we started thinking of the political as fraternal. Derrida, of course, told us that the brother was always there from the very beginning and fraternity was always part of what politics was about, the politics of friendship, the friend as brother, the brother as friend. But be that as it may, Derrida, interestingly enough, raises the question of the sister. But I came to ask about the mother for one very simple reason. In fact, which I later discovered Derrida had already raised, namely the notion that there's only one mother, right? The monomaternalism within which we work, which is predicated on an understanding of maternity that has to do with birth, that has to do with origin, with beginning, when in fact, as the cliched phrase which I quote many times in my book, it takes a village to raise a child. And so one of what seemed to me essential to recognize is that when speaking about mothers, it is precisely the fact of the plurality of mothers that is, in fact, the condition of possibility of the duration of any collective, right? So what we call sexual reproduction may not be the only way in which a collective lasts in time, but it is certainly one of the preferred way. So what that means is that we need many mothers in order to, in fact, constitute ourselves as a community, which is itself maternal in its structure, insofar as it is dependent on its own duration and therefore reproduction. And I started coming across all kinds of very famous, we might say, mythological characters, starting with Ishmael in the Bible, going on with Moses, going on to Socrates, going to Buddha, and ultimately with Oedipus, which are all characters that have two mothers. And two mothers appears to be, in fact, a kind of topos that has gained almost no attention. And it's quite extraordinary. Oedipus had two mothers, and most people do not even remember the name of the mother who raised him, named him, and fed him, and from whom he ran away in order to escape the curse that he was informed about. I've said that everybody remembers Jocasta, who is the mother who wanted to kill Oedipus. People remember Antigone, who is, of course, Oedipus's daughter and sister, and almost nobody remembers Merope. Merope being the queen of Corinth, who actually raised Oedipus, named Oedipus, and fed Oedipus. So that other mother, right, which in the Bible comes under the figure of Hagar, Sarah and Hagar, the two mothers of Ishmael, and one is a slave and the other is a sovereign who in fact is interested in killing, right, in killing the child. So the political and maternal sovereignty, which is a term that is found almost nowhere, ends up being in fact quite essential to reflect on what mothers are. And Hobbes, of all people, actually identifies a maternal sovereignty, which is the power of mothers to preserve, but also the power to destroy. A classic understanding of sovereignty, which ends up being quite key to any understanding of the political. Now, flash forward to the debate on abortion. That which is denied is not the choice, but rather the power of a mother to kill, not to murder, which is not the same, right? An essential distinction, after all, in law, yes? And I just want to at least reclaim that tradition to recognize what it is that mothers are and have been for the duration of the polity, but also for the nature of the polity, which always gives itself the right to kill, and even to kill its own members, right? A power that is originally, if I may put it this way, maternal, and continues to be so, and continues to be denied so, right? So there is an economic dimension insofar as, again, no collective could preserve itself over time without maternality, right? And it's a different question than the question of genre, because it's important to remember that the distinction between woman and mother is both necessary and exceedingly dangerous, right? And feminists have been battling over that, of course, for many decades. And I don't want to resolve the question, but I want to give mothers their due. Mothers who are not necessarily, although they have for the most part been women, but not only, and increasingly so today, yes, as we recognize. So that's the general idea of the book, and you can see how it resonates with the anti-political, right? It's central and yet peripheral because central, as you were putting it earlier.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that's just really fascinating. I'm really happy to have almost accidentally had this chance to talk with you, because these are very important topics I'd never thought about centrally, just peripherally. So perhaps it's time for me to think about it seriously. I mean, I would love to I'll have to speak to you another time. I mean, I run a small pamphlet publishing series. We publish short essays as print pamphlets. You can see this is the website for them here, Everyday Analysis. I'd love to do a short pamphlet by you on anti-political or something like this. They're very short, but it's what we do. We have a big reading group in London and we debate them and discuss them. And this is just exactly the sort of discussion and topic that people would really care about, but haven't had a discussion they haven't necessarily had in these terms. So, I mean, thanks so much for introducing.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'd love to discuss it. Incidentally, I'm actually supposed to come to London toward the end of October, so maybe we can
and if you
have a conversation about.
Definitely, maybe we could arrange it for then, and you could be part of this little reading group. And I'm also at King's College, so if you wanted to visit the university for a talk, but it would be fantastic to have you in any place. So, I mean, I'm sure people have enjoyed listening to that and are keen to do your course. As I say, so it's going to be, I think, are they 3 or 4 week courses? I can't remember, but
yes, it's I believe there are 4 sessions. Yes.
So this is just a mini taster, but you can spend four sessions with Gil discussing it, and you can go to the website and sign up there. So thanks everyone for listening, and Gil, thank you so much. It's been extremely.
Thank you, Alfie. Thank you for your question and your response. Yeah.
I'll be in touch soon. Thank you so much.
All right.